With that, I'll introduce our panel. So next to me is Sean Troxel.
Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Sean. I've been around the inspection business since 2010. I joined up with JD Gruwell, who is a legend in the industry, and learned a lot from him. So I feel an obligation to, give back to which camera? What camera one? Camera two? To give back to the profession. Some of the information that I was able to glean from JD and some of the process that we go through, or I go through when I'm doing an inspection. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you guys.
See, I've learned something already, that JD's last name is pronounced Gruel,
Gruel,
not Gruel.
right?
It's Gruel.
Gruel.
Anyways, next we have Jim Vaughn. Many of you may know his brother, John Vaughn. Jim is much more cuddly bear and fuzzy than his brother. His brother's very angular. And I like his brother.
I started at Home Pro in the fall of '86, and I used to attend Mac ASHI meetings before there was a Nova ASHI. But I've been with Nova ASHI since we started in about 2000. I've been on that board. I was on the very board, the Virginia Association of Real Estate Inspectors, for 10 or 12 years, been on the national board. I did leave Home Pro in '92 and start my own business, and been there ever since.
Next, we have Mark Mostrom, former Mac ASHI president, current Mac ASHI treasurer, soccer dad to 3 or 4 or 7 children.
Yeah, 3.
I think he's Mormon.
3 athletes. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Mostrom. I've been a member with Mac ASHI, from the beginning. So it's either 2008, 2009. I can't remember anymore. And was immediately, I think my first meeting, I went to a board meeting first, and I've been sucked in right from the beginning. So so I've learned a lot with the chapter here, and as Alan was talking about, just the process with putting together our presentation. The research that we're doing is it's unlike any seminar we've ever done before, and this has been a really valuable experience for me, and it's great learning through our research, but also just learning from chapter members and our committee members here. So looking forward to our presentation.
So the thing Mark didn't say is he actually has no idea what the presentation is about. So
I have missed the last few meetings, but yeah.
So Mark, have you been on the board in one way or another since 2008, 2009? As a director, as a president, turn off your phones, everyone.
Yep.
Mark reminded us.
So I think the first year I was just attending the meetings. Scott Perry, I don't know if you folks remember Scott Perry. He was a great on help for me, and then he's like, you should come over to the meetings. And so I think I was brought in as a vice president pretty quickly, which I had no idea what that meant and in terms of the role of the chapter, but anyway, yes.
So working our way back across, you got an guesstimate on how many inspections you've done? Total?
Oh, total?
Just big numbers, 4-digit numbers.
I mean, it's well over 1,000. I can't tell you exactly how many from there, but it's probably a couple to 3.
Yep. And Jim, how about you? Roughly.
I have no idea. A lot.
A lot. All right, Sean, how about you?
Our company has done 16,400 some inspections.
And you've been a part of or doing?
Yeah, I've probably 3,000-ish, something like that. This isn't the golden years. A lot of those inspections were done. JD used to do 2 a day,
right?
5 days a week. Yep.
So when Sean says he's done a certain number, you can double that or maybe even triple that in terms of the amount of work that he's done, since he does 3 times as much as anybody else does. You
True.
should see one of his
And
reports.
we'll get into that. Well, I must be the only one like fixated on the number. So I use 3D and every time I start a new inspection, it tells me what number I'm on. And so my goal is 10,000. I'm at 8,000, like 55 right now. I have rethought my goal of 10,000 because at the rate I'm going, that's another 20 fucking years. Yeah. So our first topic, and I think when we do our actual presentation, we aren't going to dive right into this technical mess that we're about to enter, but this is where we're starting. So we're starting with the air conditioning units and heat pumps. And we got a number of questions about refrigeration equipment, about protocols for inspecting them, how to identify certain components, what's important, what's beyond the scope that you can do, what's the minimum you can do, what are the different systems. So one of the big questions is, do you test ACs when it's cold outside? And before I think we get too far into the question, we'll just run down the list and so I test ACs all the time. I have no problem turning the air conditioning on. When it's like really cold, like in the teens, then I'll check too cold to test. But if it's 25, 30, I'll turn it on, get a sense of what's working on it or not. And I'm perfectly comfortable doing that. Sean, what do you do?
Say, I test air conditioners. I test air conditioners. Oh, camera's over there though.
Well, sorry.
Yeah, I test air conditioners when I do home inspections because I'm required to test air conditioners when we do home inspections. So, same as Alan.
That's what the standard says.
Yep, down,
Excuse me, you're required to inspect them.
correct,
That's what he said.
correct.
No, he
We'll-
said they're
we'll get
required to
that.
test. He said required
get
to
to-
test.
We'll get to that.
I think he said inspect. Can we roll it back? I think Sean said inspect. Anyway.
Somebody throw the red flag. What did he say? Roll it back. Yes, inspect. Good qualification. We're required to inspect and describe the air conditioning system.
So
And we'll
Jim-
get to that later. We'll get
Jim,
to-
where do you come down on cold weather testing?
I'll turn them on. I won't actually test them to see if they're cool, but I'll turn them on to see if they turn on. Yeah,
And
Why
you,
not?
Mark?
He's a box checker.
Right.
Wow.
Whoa.
Oh,
Whoa.
wow. That's,
He is
okay.
unbelievable.
I'm just kidding.
Could be
Mark.
this
I'm
kind of
just kidding.
presentation. No, I guess I operated, and I think this was one of the things that I probably learned here at this chapter was not to fire up the AC unit because the refrigerant could be sluggish. You could, especially on an older unit. To be honest, over the past month, with our conversations, I'll fire it up. I mean, I'm not gonna run it for a long time. I mean, if it's a heat pump, sure, then I'll obviously test it because I want to see the reversing valve. But even then, I'll test it.
Well, this is, you can do a show of hands online, but for the room, how many of you have had to replace an air conditioning unit?
Haven't had.
No, have had to do it.
Because you,
Have you ever had to pay for an AC unit that you
Wait.
tested?
What you're telling us to do is.
Oh.
Does anybody
Let's
Does
be
anybody
clear.
had to pay for
None of us are telling you or anyone else what to do. We're telling you what we do.
Right.
We're not telling you to do it. We're telling you what we do.
You guys are supposed to be the instructors.
And again, we're telling you what we do. Anyways,
there.
we
It's
did,
definitely a business decision.
we did hear from, is it Tom Mannix or
Jerry.
Gary Mannix from Mannix HVAC, and he said, turn them on. He
Yep.
said there was certainly a time on the older units where
Exactly.
there was definitely a problem, and you could risk damaging the unit. On the newer units, a lot of them are going to have heaters. A lot of them have the scroll compressors. Essentially, as we move forward, turning on those outdoor units is not a big deal.
The new refrigerant isn't as susceptible to problems either.
Slugging.
I think one of the things you mentioned,
Take notes, please, and then we'll work through that. Because that's one thing, and when we go to do the seminar, it's not going to be a free-for-all from the audience. The discussion is here. And then we'll allow some comment at the end, but it's not gonna be a winding down into whose flashlight is bigger conversation.
My flashlight.
So the next question around this topic is, do you test heat pumps in the heating mode when it's hot outside? And my answer is yeah. I mean, I don't see why not. If in the heating mode, it's trying to cool the outside. There's plenty of heat to cool. Heat pumps when it's warm.
To a certain extent, I test the heat pump when it's warm outside when I test the air conditioner. I'm on if the air conditioner works in a heat pump, the heat pump's gonna work in a heat pump because it's just the same system running the other way. I'm not checking the reversing valve when I do that. So there is a possibility that I've never encountered, but the reversing valve could go bad and I'm gonna miss that.
Jim?
Depends on what day it is.
So Tuesdays
Sometimes I
or
check
sometime
them,
in July?
sometimes I don't.
Definitely not on Sundays.
I almost always check the backup heat.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that a little bit later from here, but when it's warm outside, Mark, opinion on the heat pump?
Yeah, definitely. I don't even see why that would be
Yeah, I
a
don't either.
consideration not to. I mean,
It doesn't make any sense to me, because if you can check if you can check the AC side of a heat pump, when it's cold outside, which you can do, because it definitely has a crankcase heater because it defrosts itself, then it's gonna cool. And if you run it the other way, it's gonna warm, and it's just trying to move heat. And so when the unit outside is in heat mode, it's refrigerating, right? It's trying to cool
Right.
that coil.
and I think it's also important, obviously with a heat pump, you've got basically two types of heating if it has a backup, and it should, but also that they're going to work in combination. So kind of want to go through those three different stages.
Well, and we're gonna get into that right now,
Okay.
because Sean is gonna walk us through sort of his protocol. So Sean, what is your testing inspection protocol for AC and heat pumps?
Well, let me see here. First, I'm gonna go I do the exterior first. So I'm looking outside to make sure that I can even turn the air conditioner on, making sure it's not covered up, making sure it's safe. Verifying the stuff outside, the disconnect, the data plate, whether it's got feed or not, the wall penetrations, clearances, the general condition, etc. There's a lot of stuff to check. And we're figuring out that there's a lot of stuff to check when we try to make these lists of what we check. It's almost endless. Anyway, I'm checking that outside. When I go inside to check the air conditioner, I'm doing that part of the inspection first when I go inside. I'm gonna go over to the thermostat. Assuming a summer condition, right? The air conditioner is running on and off in normal operation. I'm gonna lower the thermostat 5 to 10 degrees. I'm gonna go around the house and check all the associated ductwork to verify the airflow. When I come inside to check for thermostat or look at the thermostat, I'm gonna check for multiple thermostats, and I'm gonna check each system, right? If there's two cooling systems, I'm gonna check one system, and then I'm gonna do the same thing on the other system. So, check the airflow at all the registers. That takes 10, 15 minutes, depending on the house and accessibility and whether there's stuff in the way or not. Then I'm going to verify the breaker size at the panel from the data plate information. I'm going to go to the panel when I've got the cover off, and I'm going to put my amp clamp on the breaker, the meter clamp on the breaker, the circuit of the air conditioner right there next to the breaker. I'm going to verify that the amperage reading is approximately 80% of the RLA, which is listed on the data plate. I'm going to measure the delta T across the coil, the evaporator coil. I'm going to verify the disconnect switch is operational. I'm going to turn the disconnect back on, and I'm going to remove the fan door cover to make sure the fan door safety switch is operational. And then I'm going to turn the air conditioner off to test heat later in the inspection at the end. After I test the heat, I do the whole entire inspection. One of the last things I do is put the thermostat back where I found it. And that's how I test my air conditioners.
So when I first started, I had a tendency to forget to reset the thermostat to where I found it.
Yeah.
And so
You want to talk about complaints?
I
you
would walk
forget that-
in and I would just put my bag under the thermostat and I would just leave it there. And then finally I figured out how to turn off the thermostat and put it back.
Somebody suggested that you leave your keys on the thermostat so you couldn't drive away without them. I tried that only one time because when I realized that I didn't have my keys, the agent had already locked the door and my keys were locked inside. So I advise against that one.
That's good. That's good.
Definitely. So we're gonna go back to a couple things that Sean was talking about. And I guess the first one for Jim and Mark is how often do you get your amp probe out and stick it on the hot there?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
What's an amp probe?
There you go.
So,
Multimeter.
I'm kidding. No, I don't, I know some people do, but I don't get into that degree.
What say you, Jim?
so based on advice from JD Gruwell, I bought this expensive multimeter that
It is.
checks in rush.
The one that you can use for amps is expensive.
Yeah, so you can turn the meter on, set it for in rush, walk up the thermostat, start the system. Then when you get back to your amp probe, or whatever brand you're using, it tells you how much current was drawn when the unit started up. So I did that for maybe about a year or so. And then I just thought, you know what? This information is not relevant to what I'm doing. So I run the system and I check the system. The first thing I do is when I go around the house at first, is I get the data tag or the data tags off the AC units or the heat pumps. And right then I either check the fuses at the disconnects or I leave the disconnects open to remind me when I'm doing the real exterior part of it to check them then if they have fuses. If they don't have fuses, I'm usually writing down what's on the data plate on my hand so I don't have to look in the camera. And then I can check the breakers or fuses when I'm in the house. But I'm always checking to make sure that whatever's on the data tag, that system is somewhere protected with its 20 or 25 or 30 amps.
I have two flukes that I use all the time and I never use them for measuring amp draw. I mean, the last time was when I was taught how to do it 30 years ago.
Do you check the backup heat?
Yes, I do check the backup heat, but I'm not measuring draw.
rush
I'm not
on.
making sure that, all 5 coils are turning on. I'm just making sure it's blowing heat.
Fair.
Welcome back. One thing I forgot to mention when we got started, and Alan, I'll ask your help in getting us started here. Thank you. Is we also have Larry Serro joining us online. So I can see him here on the Zoom and everybody in the room can't, but you'll be able to hear Larry because Larry's going to say hello.
Hello.
There we go. Thank
Hi,
you,
Larry.
Larry's been instrumental in working on this project with us remotely on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we're looking forward to having him come up and join us in May for the actual seminar. We had left off with heat pumps and we're gonna get back into that in just a second, but we did get some initial feedback. And so I want to be very clear. We're not telling anyone what to do. We are telling you what we do. In various ways, we all exceed the standard. So we exceed the minimum requirements of home inspections. And some of that has to do with our personal experience. Some of that has to do with the thing that we did get burned on and we're never going to let that happen again. And some of it has to do with the way we were trained. So we're telling you how we do it. You should inspect to the standard. If you decide to inspect beyond the standard, you should charge more money because that's what I do.
Amen.
So back into heat pumps, and we're gonna try to be a little more targeted to this. So do you check delta T? And I would say yes, most of the time. And we can have a little bit of a discussion about it, but delta T is a component in determining the effectiveness of a system's functionality, but there are many other components. And the experience I have in testing delta T, I use a digital thermometer. I try not to poke it through the vibration damper, the connection there in front of the client, because they go, Are you gonna fix that?
There's usually a hole there.
They're usually,
Brett.
except if it's new, maybe
Or-
not, but
or
yeah, there's, you
six.
find the other holes.
You don't carry an ice pick?
I do actually.
Right? Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes you
Make
have
a
to
hole.
take that hole and make it bigger. But I do find that sometimes I get a false reading. Like I know the system's working, right? It's dry and cold everywhere I go in the house. But my thermometer is measuring some goofy number and sometimes it's just the way you put it in. Sometimes you don't know what's inside. It can get flapped around. It can sit right over the top of the A coil and not get the actual temperature. So Delta T is something to use in your protocol for testing AC systems. It's not something you have to do.
I look for extremes in when I'm looking at the change in temperature, right? If it's 2 degrees or 3 degrees or something like that, that's notable, you know,
Right.
mention that. If it's 30 degrees or some, really excessive number, mention that too. Look for the extremes. And if it's in between there, approximations, it's operating on the time you check it, right?
It gets a little tough sometimes when that number's,
Yeah.
10-degree difference, 12, 14.
Yeah, there was I'm gonna space his name. I'm terrible with names. Good presenter from Pennsylvania, the University of Pennsylvania. Cecil B. Johnson. He talked about getting out the, swing psychometer and figuring out the humidity because the humidity has a big impact on the change in temperature and you can get kind of outlier numbers and still be within, the system is operating fine. It's just super humid or not humid at all or whatever.
But you can also tell after a while when you've been inspecting houses, when you walk in, you can tell that the AC is not working without, it's on and you just walk in and you can feel it.
Yep.
And you just go, all right, that's not working. And
Something's off.
you can walk in and you can smell that the compressor's burning up, or you can smell, something happening and it won't take you long to sort of dial into what that is. So is Delta T a dependable way to measure things?
I don't think being the only, go ahead, Mark. I don't think being the only thing, you shouldn't use that as
Should
the way that you
triangulate
test
or
it.
whatever the
Right.
next geometry.
I wouldn't say
size
it's
would
the
be.
only thing, but it's definitely, an important indicator.
Yeah,
know.
it's certainly a benchmark that
Right.
has useful information, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah, you have to be careful because.
So the next question is, do you use thermal imaging? And so I have
missed it.
3 different thermal imaging cameras, only one of which that actually works right now. But I use my thermal imaging camera all the time. For heat and AC, I use it to just check airflow. And in fact, twice in the last week, new construction, plans show vents in the laundry room and under the kitchen island, no vents, thermal imaging camera, nice cold spot right in the kick plate, in the ceiling, easy to find. But, the builder didn't see it, the drywall guy didn't see it, the HVAC guy, I mean, this house is ready for delivery.
Yeah.
So that's a good use of thermal imaging. I don't use it for temperature so much as just like color. Like, I can tell when the electric heat is kicked in.
Yeah, I use my hand still. JD taught me to just hold your hand up near the register and feel the air moving.
JD also used Polaroid pictures.
He did use Polaroids, but I would say with the thermal imager, you can get a relatively low flow and still get a color difference at that register. And if you put your hand up, you might notice that, right next to the furnace, the room next to the furnace, the air is blasting out of there, but the furthest is really light. That's something you might want to mention, and you might miss something like that with a thermal imaging
Right.
camera.
Well, if you're
that's
just
the only,
relying,
right,
yeah, exactly.
right.
Yeah, I don't
Thermal
use it
imaging?
so much. I don't use it so much for flow as much as for checking I use the infrared gun for checking relative differences in all the different things. The further away you get, the more of a the less it's going to be the same as where you started. You know what I mean?
And when you say a gun, do you mean like with the laser sensors or with an actual camera?
No, the infrared thermometer.
Yep.
I know the one.
Infrared, Jim, Mark?
So I do have it. IR cameras and I do have
I have
laser
one too.
thermometers and I think one thing you said is important there. When I walk into the house, I can kind of tell if the system's working or not.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people aren't maybe as sensitive to humidity. That's really obvious to me. If the house is really dry or if it's really damp, cold and damp, that's terrible. I did for years, always check the Delta T. But now I'm more checking the system itself. I take the covers off. I take a picture inside the blower so I can see how dirty the blower is. Or if it's a heat pump, I'll slide the camera up or the ferret camera in there and take a look at the coil there. That's really important. If the coil's dirty, your Delta T is going to be off. If the filter's dirty, your Delta T is going to be off. I talk to people about leaky duct work, what it takes to get it fixed. So yeah, infrared. I've seen reports with pictures of every single register with an infrared camera. I don't think that adds value to the inspection.
I agree. I think the only time it's useful is like there's a leak in the ceiling and you can't see it, but the infrared is showing you and your moisture meter shows you.
Or that
That's a
missing,
useful picture. Or
that missing register, it's clear as day. That's where it's supposed to be.
So one thing that Sean does is he compares the amp draw, and if you look on the nameplate rating for, and this looks like a carrier unit maybe, there is I always call it running load amps, but it can also be real load
Rated,
amps,
rated, running.
rated load
Right,
amps,
yep.
which is essentially the amp draw that should be happening while the system's operating. And then there's a startup one, which is what's that, locked rotor amp?
Locked rotor.
Yeah. And I don't measure those things at all unless I'm like troubleshooting and sort of doing something on a friend's house or on my own house. But I know that Sean and Jim do a little bit with this, so now you can do that.
So, we're not looking at that slide, but the RLA, the running load amps or rated load amps are, I'm looking for approximately like 80% of that on my amp draw on the meter, right? That's ideal operation. I think there's different advice. It can be between 60 and 90%, somewhere in there, right? It's not perfectly that number every single time. But as that amp number gets closer and closer to that number, there's more and more wear on the system, causing it to draw more and more amperage, right? So if you get to that number or over that number, that's a heavily worn system, and that deserves mention, in my opinion.
So it sounds like another touch point to triangulate the
Mhm.
status of the
Mhm.
system, because you could have a system that's running hot, getting high, but cooling perfectly fine, airflow's fine, no
Yeah.
indication that it's about to kill itself.
Right. And then the locked rotor, really, that's when I'm checking air conditioners when it's cold outside. That's one of the only things I'm looking for when I'm checking them. And I didn't mention earlier, I'm including a big disclosure about how I did not fully evaluate the air conditioning system, and you need an HVAC contractor to come out and fully evaluate the system. I'm testing it, or I'm inspecting it, right? I'm inspecting it,
Yeah.
right? But I am not fully evaluating the system, and I make that very clear to the clients. You know, I'm checking a couple things, but there's all this stuff that I can't tell because it's cold outside or whatever. But the locked rotor, if it goes all the way up to locked rotor and stays there, which people sell houses in the wintertime sometimes when the air conditioner doesn't work, and they're like, the inspector's not going to find that. Their realtor tells them whatever. So I find it pretty often in the wintertime where the air conditioner just is kaput. And in those instances, I'm like, man, I'm glad I do all this work. Because it is every inspection, it's a lot of work. And the reward isn't always there. You know, I don't find it on every inspection, not even close to every inspection. So yeah, technically exhaustive, right? Comes to mind.
This next item, this next slide was something that we all learned actually yesterday, and half of us were pretty excited about it. So it was talking about identifying a heat pump, and one of the easiest ways to identify that heat pump outdoor unit is the reversing valve. And on some of them, it's super obvious. There it is. It's a heat pump. On some of your reams and roods and some trains, they're hidden. They're in that side compartment, and so you gotta look at the nameplate, but now it's completely sun blotched, and so there's other things you gotta figure out. But we learned this last night. So on a typical AC unit, there's 2 ports for gauge connection. On a heat pump, there's 3. And so I think I can do this right there. So we got our two line sets here with gauge connections, and then there's this one sticking up right there. That is a third port that's for measuring heat only, and it's actually not measuring effectiveness of the system, it's just measuring that there's flow in the other direction when you switch it over. So if you're trying to figure out, is it a heat pump, and you can't see the reversing valve, but you think the thermostat says heat pump, the indoor unit looks like a heat pump.
It's on legs.
Right, and no gas connect, it's got electric coils, is it a furnace, but so this is another way to sort of triangulate that.
Well, another typically pretty easy way to know is just on the data plate. It's going to say at the bottom, usually listed air conditioning component or system, or if it's a heat pump, it's going to say maybe heating and air conditioning or heating. But yeah,
Google
Yeah.
that.
but not all of them have it,
It'll tell you every time. The model number is definitive. If you're
All the
curious.
carrier products tell you what they are.
True. So we've spent quite a bit of time just on this one topic, and I think one of the things we're gonna try and do is sort of narrow down some of this. This was like a heavy loaded topic to get into. We have a couple other ones, so I think we'll switch gears and sort of move through this and just skip through here, and we'll come back to all that stuff when we actually do this. So the Maryland SOP says inspect means to examine readily accessible systems and components of a building in accordance with the standards of practice set forth in this chapter using normal operating controls and opening readily openable access panels. And we just talked about all the different ways that we do more than that.
Yeah, this is the minimum. And these-
Describe the means of a report system component by its type or other observed significant characteristics to distinguish it from other systems or components. So you're essentially describing what kind of a system you have, what kind of heat it is. You might add in some other stuff. This is more of the SOP.
So that's
Okay.
all the minimum, like inspect and describe. And that's what you have to do for the heating system, and that's what you have to do for the cooling system. And that's all you have to do. So, going above and beyond is absolutely your prerogative, and it's not necessary, and all those things. You develop a niche though, and people pay you to do the things that you do. So, figure out what you want to do, figure out what the process is, stick to the process, make sure you're doing the important stuff and not overlooking some important detail. And then win.
Now, quick question for you guys, because I mean, you guys go to a higher degree than I do.
That's why you're on that end of the thing.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm down here. That's why I have a microphone. So have you guys encountered any pushback by almost creating the perception that you're now an HVAC technician and you're going beyond kind of the normal scope? Has there been pushback where
I was
another-
expecting an elevator today, and the elevator installer was grilling me about how I knew what I was doing. Then I pulled out my 14 elevator keys and I said, I kind of have some sense of it. But that's not,
I'm
what-
just-
that's not
I-
what you meant.
I'm not questioning you, but I mean, in that respect, I mean, but have you had an instance where, you put something in a report and then, you get some backlash from it that maybe you weren't right, but you thought you were right on something that was outside really
I
the
think
general scope?
I think setting the expectation with your clients, that's one of the first things that I do. And part of that conversation is, look, I'm the tip of the iceberg on this stuff, right? I'm not an expert, jack of all trades, master of none. Yeah.
There's another sentence there I learned recently, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, but to set that expectation and let your clients know that, if something seems off, I'm going to tell you what I think it is. I'll give you my opinion and I'll point you in the right direction, right? You go get the expert to come in and tell you exactly what's going on. And, that's what this is all about.
Do you do that for all systems, like for all inspections? Say, one of the first things you should do is have your, get a routine or annual service visit, or do you?
I tell people that because they'll say,
You get
should
a
I
pure
get a service
baseline.
contract? This is one of our sound bites. I had Wyatt install an AC only system in my house 15 years ago. I've never had it serviced. I might clean out the trap, try and do the filters. It works perfectly. So if getting service contracts makes you feel comfortable, if you always buy that extra warranty, yeah, get a service contract. If you want to be able to call somebody and get them there when everybody else's aren't working, like in July, then get a service contract. But the reality is you can service your own unit pretty much.
True, I guess maybe service contract wasn't the best term. I mean, I do recommend to my clients to have an HVAC professional come out once if they acquire the home, if it's like, or if we're under contract, they're under contract. To really get a deeper baseline, they can check refrigerant levels, things like that. I mean, some of the normal stuff, you don't have to get into it every year, because you're right, I don't have anyone service my system either, but do you recommend that at all, or is it only when you see that there's a problem that you recommend that they have someone come out and take further?
I mean, I recommend that for the generator, but again, it kind of depends on the client. It kind of depends on the house. A lot of my clients, I show them where the filter changes. That's the last time they're ever going to look at that, right? Because they got a guy for that. But it's important to show people how it works. So we're going to move on to grounds and neutrals, and I think we could actually spend almost as much time as we have on this. And so hopefully everyone's at least aware that in your panel boards, unless it's the service equipment, all other panel boards, and we'll call them sub panels, but there is a whole debate that there is no such thing as a sub panel, but we all use that word, so we'll use it. But in your sub panels, your grounds and neutrals need to be isolated, right? They can't be bonded together there. And a lot of your panels come already bonded. So if you don't modify the panel, you start off with a bonded panel that needs to have it separated. But in 43 words or less, Jim, why is it important to isolate grounds and neutrals?
Objectionable current.
Objectionable? Like
Objectionable current. So that's current. That's supposed to be on the neutral, but it's getting on the ground and it's going everywhere. It's objectionable.
So it sounds like it's a safety issue.
It is a safety issue. It can kill. It can actually kill you. And people have been killed, certainly. So the reason we have them separated is to make sure that the current's flowing back on the neutral, not on the grounds, not getting on the ground system. So once it gets over on the ground side, the way things are connected, it can go anywhere. It can end up on plumbing, ductwork, refrigerators, kitchen stoves, whatever. It just, it's a mess. Got to keep them separate. Yeah.
So this is one of the ways that you can get shocked when you touch your stove. People are like, every time I touch the stove, I get a little.
Refrigerators. I found 170 volts on a refrigerator. It was, plugged in with the ground pin cut off and plugged into a 2-hole outlet. And how this refrigerator was coming up with 170 volts, I have no idea. It's 170 volts AC run on a meter. I guess the windings in the motor or something were up in the. Fortunately, there wasn't a sink right next to it.
So separating the grounds and the neutrals, a lot of times you'll open up an older panel, say 1990s or earlier, and they're all tied together. It's all bonded there.
Was that a sub panel or me?
Yeah, and a sub panel.
Sub panel, yeah.
I guess first thing is, do you write that up and what do you say? This is old work. It's been there forever. It probably predates the requirement for separating.
It's still wrong. It's a safety issue.
I think that requirement's
So
been
there's
around
no-
since 1914 or something too.
Yeah,
Really?
it's been around for a
It's
long
very
time.
old.
But anytime it's a safety issue, it gets written up as a safety issue, major problem, life safety.
So the service equipment is where your primary disconnect is, and sometimes that's just an actual single throw disconnect on the outside. It could be on the inside, or it can be at the main panel board. But sometimes you'll see the main panel board is actually a sub panel. So even if it has a 200 amp disconnect, if there's another disconnect upstream, that's the service equipment, and the panel board we're dealing with is technically a sub panel, even though it looks like a main panel. And your grounds and neutrals need to be separated there.
They're moving in that direction with the exterior disconnects required by the fire department. All the
Just every
interior,
house will have a disconnect.
yep, all the interior panels will be sub panels.
And it seems that electricians in DC have a big problem figuring out what's a sub panel and how to wire it. I see more problems in DC than anywhere else.
Yeah, I've seen that in some of those small condo developments, like they take a townhouse and make it into 4 or 5 condos, and
Yeah.
they all are service equipment. outside, disconnects, panel boards inside, and
Yep.
I will say I did buy service for an HVAC system once for someone. And it was a goodwill gesture.
out.
It was a condo, new construction condo, and I don't know if anybody does new construction condos, you'll see that you go up on the roof and the units are all labeled one way. But maybe not the room numbers, or during construction, they changed the lettering, and so instead of 301, it's 3A. And so, and it was one of my guys at the time inspected this condo. He got the system to work, but it wasn't really working because when the young lady moved in, her unit was controlling the upstairs unit and the upstairs unit was controlling her unit. And it took me an electrician like a half a day running back and forth between I mean, that's what I started to suspect when I went over to try and take a look at it. And then I had the electrician come out and everybody got flowers and it worked. And I learned something.
That's
So
nice of you.
If I'm up on
it was
high rise,
purely for the agent referral.
if I'm on a high rise roof, I'll make sure someone stays by the thermostat so I can call them.
Yep.
Turn it on, turn it off,
Yep.
so I know which one it is.
And then there's all sorts of tricks for how to get that door open when it's locked and says, you know, authorized access only. Get your Slim Jim out, or you can see that. So you actually, one thing to look for is the combination lock is going to be written somewhere near there. You just got to look around and somebody will have scrolled it in the corner. And that's how you get it open. Anyways, grounds and neutrals. They're important. It's a safety issue. I think it's helpful to understand it so you can explain it to people. What I tell my clients is we want to, when they're tied together, we have a potential issue. We want to eliminate potential. We need to separate them. It's a potential issue where you might get shocked. You know, nothing's going to happen, but it could.
So,
Let's avoid that.
so people need to understand something basic about electricity. If you were checking one of these light fixtures, there's voltage going to the fixture because the light's on. What's in the circuit past the fixture? No voltage because the light used it. There's current. The current flows on the neutral.
And that current has no voltage.
Right, but it can kill you. It's got amperage. Yeah. So whatever device it is, if it's a motor, whatever you're turning on, that's using the voltage, but there's still current flowing back to the transformer. Current always wants to go home. It wants to go back to the transformer. So it comes on the hot side, returns on the neutral. Cycles, 60 cycles per second in the US.
What about three phase?
That was more than 43 words.
True.
Sorry.
Another
I got one.
another topic of importance is cross connections. And actually the other day I said to Hollis that, you know, that this doesn't really matter to me so much. And he was like, what? And then actually, as we went through it, I was like, oh yeah, I guess it is kind of important. But I guess my point was I don't see cross connections that are so egregious that I need to call them out that often. There's a bunch that are allowed by the code, like your wands coming off your soaking tub and all sorts of hose bib connections.
Rinse hoses on sinks,
Yeah.
spray hoses.
So unless it's something just asinine, I don't really bring it up. What say you, Sean?
I do bring it up. I talk about cross connections on hose bibs and all that stuff. I classify the lack of a anti-siphon device as a safety issue on the hose bib.
Yep.
A lot of people
Yep.
are like, come on, safety issue? Like it's a $3 part. You just screw it on there. I'm like, yeah, well,
You're right.
go do it.
Right.
Like, if it's that easy.
Cover
then
plate
why-
on it.
Yeah. So I talk about cross connections. Most of them that I'm talking about are at the hose bib.
Mhm.
You know, plumbing fixtures have come a long way and there's a lot of exceptions. So if it's a most modern plumbing fixtures, they don't have those designed inherent cross connections that we learned about and talked about in the past with some of these big cast tubs with the fill valve
Right.
inside the tub rim and stuff like that.
But on those, you can't tell if it's got the built-in
Right. And
Till a
all,
certain age.
all of this originates from, the hose is sitting in your bucket of fertilizer outside and the fire department pulls up and pulls negative pressure on the system. And it's possible that they can pull that water back through your hose into the drinking water and then poison the drinking water and people get sick
They
or
have
whatever.
replaced the main.
What if it's
It's ha-
new construction in WSSC territory where there's already a backflow on that water lead in?
Yeah, a lot of the things that the code has adopted as safety is a lot of it's based in safety. The manufacturers have been like, all right, let's design out this safety issue. And they've come up with products that just don't have it anymore. It's great. Hopefully we can get to a point where we can get rid of some of these redundant old codes because nothing is affected by it anymore. But it's always good to, have a mind in safety to make sure that everything's legit.
So when we're sure that all the water meters out there have backflow preventers on them, we don't have to check for
Right.
cross connections anymore.
One day.
And that's assuming it works.
Right. Right. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is the 0.001% chance that something goes sideways. You better have mentioned it, or they're gonna come after you and be like, why didn't you say anything? And that really opens up. Oh my goodness, the amount of stuff we have that we're kind of responsible for is mind-boggling if you think about it. Don't think about it too much.
Think about it, just do your job.
So we're gonna shift gears a little bit. We have one more topic to discuss, and that's broken trusses, but we also have some general sound bites that we were throwing around yesterday, just to get a sense of like how everyone responds to these different questions. And the first one, and we all had different things to say, was these are questions you might get from your client or the agents involved, or even maybe the seller, but would you buy this house? I tell people I'm not in the market for a house, and I don't follow this part of the market, and, I don't see any reason not to buy the house. Maybe the mortgage, but other than that,
I don't need a house. I have a house. Yeah, I don't have this kind of money.
Mark,
I tell them, I don't care if you buy the house or not. Like, that's not my job.
I tell them actually that's in my best interest, because if we just schedule inspections once a week for as long as you want, let's do it. On a scale of 1 to 10.
Alan, before you move on to that,
Yeah,
let me just weigh in here real quickly, because I think that, I noticed, I think the first two responses that we got when you posed it were, was something along the lines of, I already have a house, or I'm not in the market to buy a house. And I think we need to be careful, because that may come across as a little bit of smartass kind of a thing, which you may want to be careful about.
True. And I try and develop a rapport with my clients and the agent before the inspection starts, throughout the inspection. Ideally at the end, we are, giving each other grief about other stuff and having a decent time. And when I feel that comfortable, I'll
Right.
definitely slip into that.
Yeah,
mode.
yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I don't just say, I don't care if you buy it or not. I say, I say my job is to make sure that you feel comfortable with your decision. I personally don't care if you buy it or not. I'm not the one buying the place. So my job is to educate you so that you are making an educated purchase and you're within your comfort zone.
I'll sometimes say to my clients, if you're already in the market for a house like this, in this price point, in this neighborhood, we could go inspect 3 other houses that's in the neighborhood. We're gonna find the same stuff or something similar, or the same list. And so, anything we've found is gonna be house stuff. It's not like unusual. You just gotta decide if you can
Right.
swing it.
And Hollis, you're right, 100%. I mean, being a wise ass typically doesn't go over well. One of the best pieces of advice I got when I first started from an older real estate agent, and she'd said, you have to have a good bedside manner. You have to be like a doctor talking to somebody, giving them feedback. Maybe they don't want to hear, but it's not necessarily what you're saying. It's how you say it and how you're basically educating them. And then it tends to, we're giving bad news sometimes, right?
Right.
Uh,
We're ruining people's dreams.
we're potentially ruining people's dreams or their pocketbooks or budgets, right? Their visions. So, but you have to take that into strong consideration, how you talk to people and that level of respect, obviously.
So when I think about that specific question, I recognize that I have just spent the last few hours establishing rapport and credibility. And because of those two things, they trust me. And they think that my opinion has value. That's why they're asking. And if I blow them off with some kind of a offhanded remark or try to blow it off for a joke, I think that a lot of the rapport building I just made just went out the window. So Alan, I liked what you were saying. Your second stab at it was a whole lot better. Where you're telling them, you know better than I. You've been shopping in this market. You got a pretty good idea what you're looking for. You've seen other houses similar to this. If you compare this to some things that you've seen and consider the price, but realize that if we were to go and look at other houses, we're going to find things in those houses too. I like that. I like that one a whole lot better.
So when people say, would you buy this house? I usually just say, hey, if I was in love with the house, the neighborhood, the price was right, sure, I'd buy it. But I'm not buying it. You are.
Well, it's true. And Alan, you're saying like you're going to see this in other homes. I mean, I try to remind clients as we go around and see if we see certain things as we're going to kind of keep planting that seed of this is not unusual. It needs to be fixed. It could be downspout extensions, whatever. This is pretty common with an older house or settling, things like that of the soil around the house. But you definitely, it's better to keep reminding of that than wait till the end because they may be adding all this up in their head, and it's good to kind of reassure them that this is pretty typical, whatever it may be. But anyway,
So along those same lines, we get if I were your daughter, would you, let me buy this house?
yeah.
On a scale of 1 to 10, can you give it a grade, A, B, C, D?
Did the
And-
house pass or fail?
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to find your own diplomatic way of saying that because sometimes they won't let you get away without giving it I'm pretty sure I haven't seen an A+. Maybe a couple, but they would be like super high-end custom homes or something, or a really simple,
Very rare.
right?
A+.
But everything's gonna be, all the like top end builders are gonna be A-, B+, A maybe, and then a lot of C's. Maybe. Some of the things we hear, we won't talk about it, but can this house make me sick? Is that black mold? Does the seller have to fix that? What do you say when we're going around with your client and like
Wait,
after?
I want to hear some people respond to that one about it. The house make me sick, or is that black mold? How do you guys deal with that one?
I ask if they have, do you have specific allergies or respiratory issues? I mean, that's
No,
actually a
but I
good
have
thing
the-
to kind
I
of
have
build
the
on.
internet, and the internet tells me,
Yeah. Well,
I tell people black mold is a term used by people that don't really know what they're talking about in an effort sometimes to scare people. And often it's just a ignorance based thing that the color of the mold is black, therefore it's black mold. And that's not, yeah,
That means it's
Black mold.
stacky. It's gonna
Right.
kill us.
associated with stachybotrys.
but you
and
hear it on the news and like
talk
people
about-
just use it black mold.
It's all the spirit.
the allergy stuff. It's a lot like a shellfish allergy that anybody can develop at any time in their life. Some people are never allergic to shellfish ever. Some people are allergic the first time they try shellfish. JD developed an allergy to shellfish. He did the crab feast for years and years. And he became allergic to shrimp and almost died
That
one
would
day
kill
in the bathroom. No, it wasn't what killed him eventually, but he had to carry around an EpiPen because he developed an allergy. And that's exactly what happens to our bodies with mold. There are species of molds that are way more people are allergic to this type than another type, right? And that's where you hear about this black mold, the really bad stuff, a lot of people are allergic to very little bits of it. So that's one thing, but I mean, we're breathing in mold every day outside. It's everywhere. Right now, we're breathing in mold. It's just
that's how
that,
we get beer and wine.
yeah, the conditions aren't right in our bodies most of the time for the mold to reproduce and all of that stuff. So we can handle a little bit of it. It's just when, the concentrations get really high for a long period of time, it's possible you can develop an allergy, but there's no way to know. There's no way to tell. Yeah.
Do any of you do mold testing or offer mold sampling?
No.
I used to. We
I-
got a new law in Virginia.
And now you don't?
They're regulating mold again.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, they
Uh,
regulated before, and then we got a smarter governor, and he said, this is a waste of money. We're not gonna do it. Now we have a dumber governor again. And he wants, yeah.
I
But it's
think,
interesting that the regulating or the certifying body is not a group that has anything to do with mold. They have to do only with certifications. But they're the ones that you have to get certified through. So no, I'm done. Mold test kits for sale. Anybody?
I think,
You have this mold?
Yeah.
part of establishing the rapport with your clients, one of the things I always like to do is when the client first gets there, is ask them, do you have any initial questions? I don't know if you've been through the house already. I don't know how much time you've actually had to go through. Is there anything that caught your eye? Usually if they're mold sensitive, they're going to immediately say, my biggest concern is mold, or I saw something in the laundry room or in the basement. And the more you establish the dialogue, understand your clients a little bit better, that's when you can start educating them. You don't want to go into a big dissertation, but you can actually spread a lot of information out as you go through the house. And some of my favorite inspections are where the clients are starting to see things that we've already talked about earlier, and and it's actually sometimes helpful to have an
Right.
extra set of eyes, but they're learning. There really should be like a classroom setting, and when they have those aha moments, it's actually kind of fun to see because
Definitely.
they're
And I agree, it's really important to listen, because when the client asks you a question, there's a story behind that. And most often it's not, I read something on the internet, it's a direct experience that they've had. And if you're not sensitive to that, if you try and just dismiss it, oh, don't worry about that. It doesn't deal with the primary issue, which is their own anxiety about it. And so you have to sort of be sensitive to that and then explain it in such a way that, if there's mold there, well, we have a water issue. And so let's figure out what the water problem is. We can clean this up and figure it out. But if we have an ongoing water issue, that's a real issue there.
or humidity,
Or humidity, which is a water issue.
And you,
which is the water is.
and you never know what's going on with people either, what they're going through in their life.
Yeah.
I was at an inspection slab house, the kitchen floor and about 8 feet across the kitchen dropped 3 inches. This woman's going through the house with me. I get up on the roof. A friend of hers shows up there in the courtyard. The house actually has a courtyard. And I heard her saying something about her dream house. I'm up on the roof. I looked down, I was like, lady, this is not your dream house. This is your nightmare. That's actually what I said to her. And she looked at me and she says, you're right. I find out later at the very end of the inspection, her husband hadn't been dead 30 days. And we were standing in the kitchen and she looked at the realtor and she said, I can't do this. I can't do anything. I need time. Yeah. It was just the wrong time for her to be buying a house. And especially that house, it was going to be her nightmare.
So I shouldn't tell this story, but I can't help myself. I was talking a few minutes ago about how we should be careful about how hard we work to establish credibility and maybe even more importantly, rapport. So I pointed out some friable asbestos to a client one day, and she kind of shrugged it off, and we went on, moved on. And then I looked back in behind the dryer, and there's a little bit of mold back there. And I said, well, yeah, this looks like it might be some mold growing back here too. Probably a result of the dryer exhaust. And she says, oh my goodness, there's mold in there. And so she started talking about mold and telling me all about mold. And I mean, she knew all she had to use. She was talking about giving me scientific terminology. And finally I said, well, you seem to know an awful lot about mold. What do you know about? Oh, well, I work in a laboratory, and we do mold testing. We test samples for home inspectors, and she's reaching out to give me her business card. I said, well, stop. I said, wait a minute. I said, wait a minute, let's back up to where we were 2 minutes ago. This stuff will kill you. This stuff will make your nose run. You talk about, you talk about the wrong thing to say.
I actually had a client yesterday and she was a mold inspector. They had just moved up from Florida. And she's like, we got lots of mold down there, but it was actually really, it was good because earlier, we were talking about the basement. It was actually a really nice house and bone dry in the basement. And I was mentioning, it's really often you can kind of smell it when there's something wrong in the basement. And there were other, I was like, I could smell the lumber. I was saying, I can smell the framing. I can smell the concrete. It smells clean. And then she told me this, and then when she made a joke about like, so is your nose calibrated? How and I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, that's a mold inspector joke, That's full calibrated.
Yeah.
When's the last time you got that nose calibration? 2 years ago?
So did you ever have the experience where the seller is the home and wants to tag along and explain
Oh.
everything? How do you gently?
That is the worst pain in the ass. And how do you, I threw one seller out of his house. I looked at him, I said, I'm sorry. I have a job to do here. You need to leave. You need to get out now. And he walked out the door, believe it or not. But a friend of his was buying the house. And they were good friends, Asian guys. And after I threw the seller out, then at the end of the inspection, the buyer looked at me and he's like on his knees. I lost face. My friend is such an asshole. Made me lose face and blah, blah. I'm like, please stand up. Stop it. I'm not dealing with any of this losing face stuff. So that one got messy. But sellers being home,
That's
They're-
the worst dynamic.
whenever they will stand there and yak about everything until you get to where there's a problem, then all of a sudden they're quiet. They don't have anything to say.
But it's a similar situation where you can develop a rapport with the seller, ask him the questions that he wants to answer, hear him for a little bit, and then get him aside and say, look, it's in your best interest to take off right now, because that's the only way this deal is going to keep moving forward.
Yeah, it's a good.
Well, I've just,
I will usually, go ahead, Hal.
I was gonna say, I've discovered that it's helpful to watch. What I do when they show up and they start talking, I just disengage and I watch them. I go through my process. I stop talking. I figure they're gonna do all the talking. I'll let them do all the talking. I listen and I watch. And if there's something that they keep moving away from, that's where I go look.
That's good. I actually try to go the opposite direction. I mean, just because the dynamic is I find it very distracting, but that's a good point, Hollis. I'm watching their body language, and I'll have to think about that the next time, because I usually will tell the buyer's agent, look, and I'll tell my clients, if my volume starts to drop a little bit, or I may signal for you to come, let's go to the other room, because it's really hard to have that open conversation. And you don't want to create something that starts to damage the buyer seller dynamic, right? Where someone starts, things can get messed up pretty quickly. And it's not necessarily going to affect us, but it's going to affect our client. But I always try to see if the agents can kind of run interference, or if they get into a conversation, I'll try and go to another area and not have this person looming over, because it's usually like, oh yeah, I fixed that, or I put that in, and that's always good information.
What do you do when the father-in-law comes along, or the uncle who's a would-be renovator, 15 or 20 people show up because everyone's so excited about the new house? How do you manage those crowds, Sean?
I don't encounter these situations that often. I don't
Your
know.
reputation precedes you, or just-
I guess. No, I think I give Chris a lot of credit. My office is handled by my mother-in-law. I work with my mother-in-law. Yep, I said it. It's true. She's great though. Every other client is talking about how great the lady at the office is when I tell them to call her back and get a
Yeah.
few contractors or whatever. But I think she lays it out and the seller is not there when I show up at the inspection. And a couple of people come, when COVID was happening, we were pretty hardcore about, look,
Nobody.
yeah, one person can come, two people can come, no kids, no extra people, no, any of that stuff. But
So your expectation setting with the purchaser starts before you even meet them.
oh yeah, absolutely,
She's laying
absolutely.
that out.
Yeah,
When you get to, when you get on site, what's your, Hollis call it your driveway speech? Mine's a kitchen speech, but and mine's just, I got a spiel, I say it the same way every time. What do you say?
JD had a spiel that he said the same way every time.
Did you giggle behind him when he would do it, or
No, I respected
Mouth the
I
words. He
respected
knew what he
that
was
stuff
saying.
a lot.
you knew better? than
Some
that?
of the most important stuff he told the clients was, I'm not a magician and I can't see through walls and there's no guarantee or warranty that comes with the inspection or the report.
Now let me get
set
on my way.
The expectation, you set the expectation and let the client know that, do you have any questions about the contract? You got the contract, right? You signed it, you read it. Is there you need any clarification about anything in there?
Yeah, I don't like this part where it says you're not gonna do
That's-
all these things.
That's cool. We can talk about it. I've never changed my contract for anyone.
There's no need to.
JD used to walk away from jobs all the time, but that's the last time somebody tried to change our contract and we left. We didn't do the inspection for them. I don't think.
Mark, what's your spiel?
Knock on. I don't
Well,
do
yeah, I
that.
mean, and that usually, I mean, just going back, I love like when a client calls and even just trying to set up and I don't mind it when they have all these questions they ask, what's your education background? Blah, blah, blah. I think it's good because it's a good way to kind of judge. Often, I love when they're, do you, I got a quote from somebody else. Will you match their quote? And right then, I know I don't want to work with this person. I really don't want to work with this person. Not because I'm a prima donna. It's just that is telling me they don't value what we're doing, or especially if it's usually someone that like found my name off of like the Maryland home inspector list. It's not like a referral from an agent. But to your question, I mean, I do try to have, and I kind of brushed on it in terms of getting a baseline from the client, about do they have questions? It is really one of the first things besides saying hello. And it usually does. Sometimes they're like, no, we haven't even been in the house. And so I'll say, feel free to follow. I tell all my clients, feel free to shout at me as much as you like. Don't feel like you have to. I said, this is a pretty boring process, but there's a lot of information I can help convey. So, but feel free to break away and I'll come get you if there's something really important. But I guess I kind of have a boilerplate spiel, but I don't get too far into it. I probably cover a lot of that as we go along.
And how about you, Jim?
I used to have one and I lost it somewhere and
In your head?
I never got it back. Oh, I know exactly what it is. But at some point I just stopped and I was like, hey, nice to meet you. I'm going to take out pictures outside and then I'm going to come in. We're going to get started. This is what I'm doing, blah, blah. A lot of that stuff is on my website and I'm hoping they actually looked at it. My background's there, everything's there. And I lost that little kitchen speech.
I tell people I'm gonna start here in the kitchen, but mainly because when we go into the house, everybody just ends up in the kitchen and that's the base for the whole operation. And so instead of trying to talk to people anywhere else, I just put my stuff in there. I bring my water bottle in, I put it in the sink, and then I tell them, I'm gonna start here in the kitchen. I'm gonna be working around the kitchen for like an hour, and you're gonna say, when is he gonna do something else? But the whole time I'm gonna be moving back and forth. But I invite them to come with me as much as they want. As much as they can, but if they can't, I'm gonna go with them room by room through the whole house. We're gonna take a tour. You're gonna see everything I want you to see. So don't think you gotta be with me the whole time. In fact, it works. I'm able to move around because I'm gonna go from this room to that room to this room. But I agree, asking them, do you have any questions? Do you have any plans? It's helpful to know if they have plans for the house. It's helpful to know if they have kids.
Yep.
Not only because that invites an immediate rapport builder, because you've now asked about their kids and you want to know. You're going to tell them, well, I'm going to talk about safety stuff. Do you have little kids? You have big kids, boys, girls, this thing's important because your little brother can hit his head on it and cause a sprinkler to go off. And they appreciate that stuff.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I always start on the outside. That was actually gonna be a question. I don't want to get too far off
No, it's
track,
all right.
but my routine is, well, when the day's going just right, I try to get to a job early. And maybe even up to an hour early so that I can knock as much of the outside out. Well, because I don't need access to the house. I know. Trust me, I said when the day's going right, it's usually like half an hour or 15 minutes, but it does allow me to get do a good evaluation. I mean, regardless of whether I'm there early or not, I like to start on the outside. For me, water management is so imperative to a big part of the entire house. It's great to have that as a baseline because I'll know where I want to hone in when I get downstairs, especially, but I'll have a better understanding of what's going on outside when I get downstairs. But so, yeah, with the perimeter walk and the exterior components, getting up on the roof, things like that, try to get all that done. And then basically I work from the basement all the way up to the attic is usually kind of the last spot. So my outside or my speech is usually outside. If it's really cold, then I'd say, oh, it's really cold out. Why don't you guys go inside and I'll do the outside. But, having people shadow, I think is, some people I know say it's a distraction and it can be. I tell people, I'll let you know if you're distracting me and I'll apologize in advance. I'll be talking to you, but I'm probably going to be staring at my device, not to be rude, but I think it helps manage a little bit of the expectations. But having that extra set of eyes, you mentioned the father-in-law. I kind of like it. Usually if you get a good rapport with them, then they're looking out for you and they're like, and it's all about getting it in the report, right? And I tell people, look, you might see, if you see something before I do, great. Let's get it in the report and we can talk about it or talk about it and get it in a report if we need to. I feel often that father-in-law or whatever family expert it is, a lot of times they'll leave early and they'll be like, all right, you're in good hands. I'm gonna go get lunch. And that's great. Like, that's kind of what my client, I think that helps in that respect too. So
back to something we were just talking about. So do you answer your own phone, do your own scheduling?
yes.
And Jim
Yes.
and Sean,
No.
you have Chris, and my wife Susan and I work together, and I get the same reaction. People said, "Oh my gosh, Susan in the office is just amazing," and she handles all the sort of pre-sale stuff. And I couldn't do it without her. But I've had somebody in the office like since 2008, and it just sort of works better for me that way.
I had somebody for a while, but she didn't know about rush hour. She was a stay-at-home mom. And she didn't know about rush hour. She didn't know about travel time. She didn't know how long it took to get from here to there. She didn't know that duplex in Huntington was actually 4 units. Hello.
I think we can all talk about our office staff and recognize how important those people are. But I just want to pick up on what Mark was saying about the father-in-law, because this is somebody who cares, right? He may actually even have a financial stake in it. He may have been, he may have been inking the check for the down payment. But this is somebody who cares. But if he's there, it's very likely that he thinks he knows more than he does. So
Often.
so there's this problem. There's this dynamic that's building between you and him in front of. I mean, the way I don't know how real this is, but I have this sense that that if the father-in-law is there, it's because this is a newlywed couple, right? It's a newlywed couple, and dad hasn't quite let go, And so here's this young whippersnapper who's competing, with him for the love of his daughter, and now you come along, you smarty pants come along, and you're going to make him look bad. So you really have to, you have to be careful about how you address those things.
You're right.
My first attitude is that it's a free country, right? We have freedom of speech, and he can say whatever he wants, and I'm not going to contradict him. I'm not going to argue with him. But it's my job to explain things, and some of what he's explaining is either right or partly right or wrong, right? So I never immediately contradict, but I will allow some time to pass. I might actually even go to the next room and then come back. Oh, yeah, there's one other thing I want to show you back here. And I'll come back and explain it correctly. And if you handle it well and the guy is reasonable, and usually they are, what I get is, oh, well, I guess you don't need me any. I guess you don't really need me,
That
do
makes
you?
sense.
I guess you don't really need me.
No,
And that's when
you're
they
right.
leave.
It is that's a delicate dynamic, and there is you have to be creative to kind of revisit that subject again without stepping on whoever's making these profound statements that isn't an inspector. So
JD was my father-in-law.
yeah, he's warm
So
and
is
fuzzy.
it true?
Warm
Is
and
it
fuzzy.
true? Were you in competition yet, Joe?
No, he was definitely there at the home inspection.
So we're gonna jump back into a topic, but we do have a bunch of other sort of sound bites to get to, and it'd be interesting to hear what people have to say. So the question was phrased in our survey, what do you do when you see a broken truss? And this sort of expanded into sort of a larger conversation. And so how many broken trusses is too many?
My foot through the ceiling.
Too many for
Right,
what?
well, any, right? I mean,
Too many for what?
Yeah.
To make
Right.
the report?
Yeah,
Every one that I find that's broken or damaged makes the report. Yeah.
what if it's really not a big deal?
Then they'll fix it and it won't be a big deal.
How can it be a broken truss and not be a big deal?
Well, right. But what I think it was you that told us the engineer's phrase, what was it?
I don't know.
No, Jim.
What was it?
The guy, there's no such thing as a broken truss,
No, that wasn't me.
because if it's broken, it's not a truss anymore.
Oh, that wasn't me. That was someone else.
That was actually John Bolden
That's what-
quoting his professor when he was studying
Wood science.
PhD. He was getting a PhD in wood construction. And he asked the professor that question. It's like, what about broken trusses? And the guy gave him that funny look, like, what are you talking about? You know, when they unload them off the truck, they inevitably, as they're dropping the trusses off, they break one or two of them or a half a dozen of them. You know, what do you do about that? Well, you know, and the guy continued looking like, what are you talking about? And finally he said, look, if it's broken, it's not a truss anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
So can you fix those broken trusses? And,
Sure.
do you ever opine on what the fix might be?
You
Huh.
can,
Call an engineer.
yeah, you can, right?
One.
Someone qualified could fix them. It usually involves a design repair by an engineer or the manufacturer.
So there's one truss that got cracked coming off the truck. And it's up there and it's in the middle section somewhere.
Hmm.
You need an engineer to fix that?
Or the truss manufacturer.
Yeah, that's what I say.
See, I think this brings up a bigger question.
See, Hollis
Right.
knows how to,
Hollis says.
Hollis knows how to fix trusses.
All
What's
right,
the
here-
bigger
I think this
question?
brings up a bigger question. And so we can take this out of we can move away from broken trusses for a minute and just talk about our own background. So different inspectors come to the inspection business from different earlier previous careers or trades. So if an electrician becomes a home inspector and he sees an electrical problem, he may recommend a specific repair. I understand the problem. I've done the troubleshooting. I know what the problem is. I know what the solution is. I can even give you a parts list, you know, and tell you how to be careful so you don't electrocute yourself. Right? An electrician would know how to do that. Okay, so now we'll come back to broken trusses. So I'm a framer in my earlier career. I can't have no idea how many hundreds of trusses I've repaired or supervised people repairing based on engineering, right? So I'm on a construction site. A truss gets damaged or doesn't fit and has to be altered, right? So the superintendent contacts the truss manufacturer, who's got an engineer on staff, probably the same engineer who designed the truss in the first place. And he'll call me on the phone and say, well, what kind of plywood you got out there? And I'll say, well, we got some 1/2 inch CDX. And he said, okay, that's the way I'll write it up, that I'll tell him to use 1/2 inch CDX plywood. And, yeah, like how big are the pieces you got lying around? I said, well, they're about 2x4, 2 foot by 4. Okay. So I'll tell him 2 foot by 4 foot, 1/2 inch CDX. And I'll tell him to put nails every 4 inches and glue it and nail it. And I'll have it faxed over to you, in the next 10 minutes. Now, that engineer didn't do any engineering, right? And it's always the same. It's always 4 inch nail pattern, whatever 1/2 inch plywood, 3/4 inch plywood, certainly much larger than the metal gusset that it's replacing. So I don't have any trouble telling the people that repairing a truss, a broken truss, 2 broken trusses is fairly straightforward. If you can find a handyman who has some framing experience, who knows how to do this, have them do it. But however, be prepared, because the time may come, or the time is probably going to come, that you're going to be wanting to sell this house, and some other home inspector is going to come along and want to see the engineering on it. So the first thing you might want to do is simply, ask the owner if they've got any engineering, especially if there are some repairs. If it's not the broken truss, it's the repaired truss. Ask them, did they ever get this engineered? Do you have that engineering report? But be prepared to when you go to sell the house to have to come up with that. But it just makes very little sense to me to recommend that somebody spend hundreds of dollars to tell them how to do $50 of work.
Well, what do you do when you come across a truss that's been repaired? Do you then say that they should find the engineer report on it?
Well, so that's where my level of comfort comes in. I look
Right.
at it and say, this looks to me like it was done by the way an engineer would have designed it. Whether an engineer designed it or not, I don't really care. It looks good to me.
Right.
So on that same sort of line, is there a difference between a cracked, broken truss and one that the plumber's taking the Sawzall to and going all the way down the line?
Yeah, so that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, they made some extra storage space.
Oh, that's the worst.
Modified.
That's the worst.
So I had a client call me and it was the gentleman client said, I need you to come over and look in the attic, because the gentle lady client had her handyman create more storage space in the attic. And so they took a complete truss web and cut a doghouse out of it. Kind of sistered it up.
Multiple trusses,
All
all the trusses.
the trusses. Like wherever there was headroom,
Yeah.
there was no longer a truss.
Yeah.
So I came down out of the attic and I said, Mom, you can't do this. This is not safe. We have to get an engineer to engineer a fix. And so I feel comfortable commenting on that, because I then took the engineer's plans and fixed it. And it was essentially that 3/4 inch plywood, gussets this big, both sides glued, nailed. And then we took the engineer report and we stapled it at the top of the steps and said, don't use this space for storage. But my dad was seeing the nail pops start to really show up, and the joint seams, and he was like, something's going on with my roof.
Yeah, so the worst one I saw was right up 270 here. And the listing actually said bonus room in attic. And these little townhouses, what's one of these neighborhoods up here? And I'm thinking, bonus room, what the hell are you talking about? So I put the ladder up there. Last place I go on the inspection is the attic. Put the ladder up, open the attic hatch. Sure enough, all that's holding the shingles is 2x4s. Everything else is removed up there. Completely removed. I'm not going to suggest a repair in that case. I'm going to say rip the roof off and get new trusses. Rip the roof off and get new trusses. There you go.
They
How
make
about that?
trusses with bonus rooms in them.
Yeah,
They design
Yeah.
trusses just like that. You can't,
they engineer them that way.
modifying trusses that's where the trouble happens.
Well, the challenge with I think what Hollis and I might advocate, and what the code says, is the code says truss members shall not be cut, notched, drilled, spliced, or otherwise altered in any way without the approval of a registered design professional. Period.
But we're not in code enforcement.
Well, that is, well, No, we're not, but people will say, well, what is that to code? And here clearly, this is what the code says. So you would be certainly be within your rights to say, you need to call a design professional. It says it right there.
I mean, you kind of equate this stuff like, a garage door opener, right? Do you adjust the garage door opener? Right? It needs an adjustment. It's a minor little turn of a screw, right? But what happens when you do that? You take on that liability and that garage door 0.0001% chance something goes sideways, it crushes some kid's head.
Or worse, every time it closes, it opens back up again and you got to go back out and tune it.
Or whatever. But those safety issues of the liability, it's like, if you want to just make sure that, I guess, the roof isn't gonna deflect or, you know, it's not gonna get worse kind of thing, you can put some nails in it and do the engineered repair without an engineer, I guess. But to do it right, which is what I'm trying to get across to the clients, the right way to do stuff. And there may be many different right ways to do things. Don't get me wrong or think that I'm trying to paint them into a corner, but doing it right, if the code says, if the right way to do it is to get an engineer, I think we as home inspectors should be telling our clients that, even if we do have that experience. I mean, I've put up some trusses in my days. I've lost many trusses in my days. Windstorms are prevalent in the Midwest. And every now and then they blow the entire truss set down. And we would just put them right back up. You know,
like dominoes.
hindsight's 2020.
Used a lot of plywood, but we put
yeah.
them back up.
I wasn't the boss on those jobs, so whatever.
But here's a couple of images of what Hollis, I think, was talking about. What if you come in the field and you look at this, and actually I thought this was a little over nailed, but you would look for something like this, a gusset connecting different cord members, and ideally it would be on both sides. Here's another one where it looked like there was a repair and then the tin knockers came and cut it open anyways. So I'm not sure if that one section is still doing what it's supposed to do.
Tin
Oh,
knockers.
there was another one.
I had a call from a husband whose wife decided that she needed a closet off the master bedroom. And there was another attic there over the dining room. And the husband wasn't too sure about this, but by the time I got there, the handyman had gone in there and created this closet. So basically he took, I don't know the names of trusses, but they have diagonals, right? The diagonals were gone. They were all gone.
The webbing, the middle part.
The diagonal cords and the trusses. The middle part was all gone. And there was this, vertical studs to put drywall on. Is going to make a room in there. I just stood there in this space and I looked at it and said, the first thing about trusses is we don't cut them. You don't cut them. Nobody cuts them. We don't cut trusses unless someone designs cuts in them. I said, unfortunately, you're going to have to call somebody. You can't have a room up here unless you get someone in here to redesign this roof structure. It's not the handyman. Trust me.
So I think at this point, we'd like to get some feedback from our in-house audience. We've got about 15 more minutes. And so I'd like to speak for everybody. So we're open to whatever kind of feedback you have. We can certainly have additional discussions about some of it, but really we're looking for, yeah, that didn't work, or that works, or change the seating order. If you have written down any notes, we'd really appreciate to hear them.
Please use the microphones.
And Larry, my apologies. It's really hard to remember to look at you just because I don't see you on display anywhere. And it's hard to remember to ask you.
Larry should have a
chime in.
camera on. Larry
You
Sarah.
introduced Larry earlier. There he is.
Hello.
This crazy Florida man.
He's got nothing better to do than look at all the books that are on his desk on either side.
So let me kick it off here. I mean, I'm on the committee, so I got plenty of time to talk about it, but since nobody's saying anything, I found myself wondering about the level and maybe, so I'm talking to the audience. Okay. What we intended originally to do here was to make this into something more than just the entry level kind of a discussion and try to raise the bar in terms of what we're the content that we're offering. At the same time, there seems, as I'm sitting over here listening to most of it, it seems there's an assumption of that we already have the entry level information, and we can move to the more advanced or intermediate level discussion. So I guess my question would be, as we move through topics, would we be better off doing 2 minutes of an explanation of what this is, like a cross connection, for instance? Before we start talking about cross connections, should we have defined what a cross connection is? I'm seeing some heads nodding, and some of you guys out there in the remote audience, if you can weigh in on that also. So I got two yeses. Is there any no's? Anything that anybody thinking that, no, we don't want the entry level, we want the advanced. We want you to just go right direct. Nobody's.
It takes only 2 minutes. I don't think it's a problem.
A quick explanation of what it is that you're talking about, so that now everybody, including the new people, are all on the same, are all engaged in the conversation. Go ahead, Feldman.
One of the things that struck me is that the presentation, the depth of the topics was very uneven. So they're like the HVAC, you were going into excruciating detail on how to test the HVAC and test the air conditioning. And then there were other topics that was like skimmed. So very uneven depth in the topics presented, and very little discussion over, yes, we acknowledge that this is technically exhaustive. I don't test, I don't put an amp meter across that, because that's, to me, that's technically exhaustive. If you do, that's great. It's a business decision. But it just needs to be a bit more even, a little, maybe a little shallower on the HVAC and a little deeper on the electric.
That's good feedback. Oh.
Hello?
Hello?
Here.
All the way down.
There you go.
Hello, hello.
Don't drop it.
Why did everybody say, uh-oh, here we go?
It wasn't everybody. It was just me.
Just Alan. Don't be afraid of me, folks. I've been around a long time. My name is Alan Miller. I've been a builder developer for
At least he
38
spells
years.
it the right way.
And I've been inspecting houses since about 2007. And I want to tell you guys that once you do get into this and you feel very comfortable with it, I can honestly say everybody should be as happy with the job of doing inspections like this. The rapport that is established with that home buyer is one of the most important things to be established in the very, very beginning. I really enjoy listening to you guys, because I can honestly say since 2007, I have never, ever been with any other inspector, other than maybe one or two, who was part of my learning teacher. Okay, and then I was able to take it from there. I don't know what you guys really do. I love the fact that you guys are talking from a much high, a basic level to a much higher level and detailed level. I think as we go forward, you do need to stress the liability that you guys are reaching out. Alan, you're a real detailed inspector. You know a lot about HVAC systems, electrical systems, but I want you to stress to the newbie, the new person that's getting their license, hey, I've been doing this for 20 years. We're not expecting you as a new person to come out and be getting into this. You're going to scare some of these people away. People are spending a lot of money. They're spending a lot of time to get their license. I was actually supposed to speak tonight, okay? And I'm going to have an opportunity to speak, I think, in June. Hollis might schedule that. And
You're already on the calendar, Alan.
My title is how I became a successful home inspector and what my thoughts are about. I don't want to tell all of that to you guys tonight, but I think it's really wonderful. I'm hearing for the first time the detail that the level of detail that you guys are going through. I love it. Think it's there. Take it for whatever it's worth. I do
Well,
want-
and I heard at the break that that was something you had all voiced about having us really emphasize that we're definitely doing beyond the standards. We're taking on, additional risk and responsibilities, and to point that distinction out. So we'll definitely do that. That's the kind of thing that would be like at the beginning of each session, or the morning and the afternoon session, where we would sort of do that kind of a introduction.
And add to it the consequences of going to that next level, okay? Turning on that
Yeah,
heat
more
pump in
money, I
that
think,
freezing
is the
cold
biggest
weather.
consequence.
And writing in your report, I tested the heat pump. It was 32 degrees outside. And then finding out later on, you're gonna get a phone call. Well, your report says you tested that heat pump. Now it's not working. The HVAC guy came in here and says, I need a new system. Do understand, you can be sued at any time. Anybody can sue you for no matter what. Most people want money. That's what it boils down to. If you're afraid of getting sued, it's not the business for you. But keep on going where you're at. I really enjoy it.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
So talk about getting sued. A lot of guys have insurance, general liability, In Virginia, we're required to have GL, $1 million policy. Nothing wrong with that. It's cheap. It's $200 a year, whatever. I don't have E&O. When I was with Home Pro, we had sort of a self-funded E&O. We had to put so much from every inspection into a fund. We had to have $10,000 there. When I left Home Pro, I didn't buy E&O. I used to be kind of a jerk, not as bad as my brother, John, but not nearly as bad, but I was kind of a jerk. But I learned at some point that it's a good idea to make nice with your buyer, right? If you get them on your side, if you let your buyer know that you're looking out for their best interests, the chances of them coming after you are slim to none. And if they do have a question, something goes wrong, they're going to call you instead of calling an attorney. So that's one thing I learned. It took me a while. It took me a while to learn it. It took some time to learn that. But you make nice with the buyer. They are your client, your customer, and you're there to help them. And once they know that you're helping them, chances of them coming after you, that lowers the risk.
Yeah, people tend to not sue people that they like.
Right. Yep.
I was sued once, and I have I've had the whole time I've been an inspector. I was sued once for termites, and it's a long story about why I was included in that. It was one of my inspectors did it, and there was the termite guy said the house was fine. My inspector didn't see any issues with termites. There was a huge termite problem. Everybody involved in the deal got thrown in: the listing agent, the buyer's agent, the inspector, the pest guy, the title everybody. And they settled for my deductible. And it was a total pain in the ass. It was, they had I don't inspect for termites. So, it says it like 12 different ways in the contract. But because they cast a broad net and everybody settles for the deductible, we had to pay it and move on. And in that case, if it had gone to court, which was headed that way, JD was the expert witness for the other side.
Oh, no. I don't have either. JD never carried it. He talked about it like it puts a target on your back, where a lawyer, they have some possible pending thing and they look around to see what coverage everybody has. And if it's easy, they do it. And if it's going to be harder, even though they may get more money in the end, if it's going to be harder, the likelihood they do it is very slim. They don't want to do the work.
So another thing I've learned is that when you're looking at something, if it looks wrong, it's probably wrong. And I remember this very clearly. I'm standing in a utility room, and this was decades ago, and it was a 40-year-old house then, I'm sure. And the plumbing was just screwball. Here's the water coming in. Here's the water going to the water heater. Here's the water going to the sprinkler system. And it was a mess. And I thought, they're stealing water here. They're bypassing the meter. They're stealing water. And I thought, let me look again. No, they're not. Yes, they are. No, they're not. So I got this battle going on in my head, right? So I ended up with, they're not stealing water. It turned out they were stealing. So the buyers started suing everybody in sight, except they wouldn't sue the seller. the one who set it up to steal water. They wouldn't sue the seller because the sellers were Christians. They would sue everybody else, the realtor, me, whoever, but they wouldn't sue the seller who was stealing the water, who was Christian.
You heathen.
Go figure. So something looks wrong, it's usually wrong.
Yeah.
And don't overthink it.
Listen to your gut.
Yeah,
right? There's a voice there saying something's not right.
something's not right here. They're
If you-
stealing water.
If your attention, yeah, if your attention gets drawn to something 2 or 3 times as you're walking past it, no big deal. You're going to do whatever it is. And you just look down and see something, right? The next time you go by there, if you're looking and you see the exact, it's like that Matrix moment. There's a glitch in the Matrix. I've been here before. Like, pay attention. Something is happening. Something you might not see right away, but something's going on there, and your skills are like warning you. They're like, it's working, you know? So think about it. Yeah, the spidey
Yeah.
sense.
It's a disturbance in the forest.
Yeah, many times I'll have moved past it, but it's still in the back of my mind, and then I'll be like, son of a gun, that's what it is. And then you go right back
It's
and
the third time I
you can
tripped
trace
on
it
that.
out.
This is not the ground fault circuit you're looking for. Pay no attention.
There's no problem here.
I pulled out a
So-
3-foot grounding rod
Not the droid.
yesterday. right out of the
Excalibur.
I enjoyed the format, like it was really educating. And even though I don't inspect you, let's say Alan and up to Mark, I don't expect me to that level. I do enjoy learning from that just because sometimes, and I know, for example, that Sean measures on the heating, like, if it goes over the limit or the range of the limit, if it's doing. So knowing that, sometimes if I feel like something is off, like it's really hot, then I would do that for that specific house, but I'm not gonna do it for everyone. But by listening to what you guys doing, like, on a regular basis, I can, in a way, adapt some of that. So I really enjoyed this.